Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our virtual CHI event, hosted by the HCI groups at the University of Waterloo.
As the University of Waterloo is located on land with a long and rich history, we will start with reading a territorial acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. The University of Waterloo is situated on the Haldimand Tract, the land promised to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River.
Before we get started, allow us to introduce ourselves. I'm Nikhita Joshi, and I'm a PhD student at the Sheridan School of Computer Science.
And I'm Robert Peirce Gauthier, a PhD student with the School of Public Health and Health Systems.
We are your organizing chairs for this year's WAT-CHI event, an event organized to showcase papers that were accepted to this year's CHI conference.
We have organized the day into 6 sessions, 3 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. Each session will last 40 to 55 minutes, followed by an approximately 5-minute break in between. We will have a longer break for lunch, starting at around 11:40 a.m. And then the afternoon session will begin at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Please visit the event's website, watchi.live, for more details and links to the papers being presented during each session.
After most presentations, we will have 2 to 3 minutes of live Q&A. To ask your question, please post it as a comment in the stream's chat. Be sure to include your name and affiliation if it isn't obvious from the actual username that you have. The session chair will restate the question on your behalf for a presenter to answer. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started.
Oh, okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Quentin Roy. I will be your chair for the first session that is about AI agents. So I'm a postdoc researcher at the University of Waterloo. Our first talk will be presented by Anastasia Kuzminykh. It is about, so the name of the paper is Genie in the Bottle, Anthropomorphized Perception of Conversational Agents. Unfortunately, this speaker won't be able to answer questions after the talk. She's not available today. But if you want more information, feel free to read the paper and contact her by email.
Hello, I'm Anastasia Kuzminykh, and this is a video presentation of work published at CHI 2020 that we've done with my colleagues at the University of Waterloo in Canada. And this work is focusing on how people anthropomorphize conversational agents and why this matters to us. The general-purpose voice assistants, such as Alexa, Google Assistant, or Siri, are becoming more and more popular, so more and more users are interacting with them on a daily basis. And these systems, in essence, rely on users' voice interactions with a persona, or an agent, who is deliberately designed to speak and act human-like. So because of this, voice assistants end up being integrated not only in the technological space of a user's life, the ecosystem of devices in their environment, but also in their social space with whom users communicate. And thus, these systems are often being anthropomorphized, which means that people start attributing lifelike qualities and traits to these agents. And anthropomorphization heavily defines the interaction style that people adopt with these systems, which affects users' expectations, their trust, and their overall satisfaction. And so far, research has actively explored the degree of anthropomorphization of voice agents. So whether it happens or not, do we see these systems as human-like or do we see them as machine-like? However, very little is yet known on what happens when anthropomorphization does occur. Are all the agents done the same? Well, intuitively, probably no. But if not, is their perception unique for every user? Or can we find some underlying patterns there? And this is exactly what we wanted to explore in this study. What are the mechanisms of anthropomorphized perceptions of voice assistants? So what did we know about these mechanisms from before? First of all, mostly in robotics, people differentiate between designing agents' behaviors, such as emotional responsiveness, how warm they are in the interaction, their personality, and so on, and designing agents' physical or visual aspects, for example, their facial and body expressions. Say Roomba vacuum has only behavioral traits, but wax sculptures would have only visual ones. And by design, voice assistants are capable of displaying mainly behavioral anthropomorphic aspects. But what personality and behavioral aspects actually matter to users? Is there any structure to them? And we hypothesized that if there is any structure, then these perceptions will be different and consistently different for different agents. We also hypothesized that the way people perceive the personality and behavior of an agent would affect how they visualize them. So how users think the agents would look like if they were humans. Especially since an agent's answer might include visual references, for example, Siri's "I'd blush if I could." So then, if there are consistent patterns in behavioral perceptions, we can also expect consistent differences in visualized perceptions. And in the rest of my presentation, I am going to talk about how we explored this hypothesis and what we found there. First, how? So what methods we used? We took 3 agents, Alexa, Google Home, and Siri, and we first asked participants to interact with them, because we wanted to allow for in situ comparisons of these agents, so that later we were able to tease out the differences as they seen by participants. The interaction session was followed by a semi-structured interview, where we asked participants what each of the agents would look like if they were humans, and what their definitive characteristics would be. In the next phase, a visualization exercise, participants were asked to create an approximate visual representation of Alexa, Google Assistant, and Siri. And here it was actually a tough methodological call. What to use as medium? Some standardized platform or free-form drawing? And eventually we decided to go with using predefined software. We used an open-source web avatar generator, and we did that because, first of all, we wanted to overcome potential resistance from participants to a hand-drawing exercise, and we also wanted to allow a better comparison between visualizations between participants, regardless of participants' drawing skills. And we concluded with a debriefing interview to capture some general notes and comments from participants about their experience. And let's first look at the descriptions of agents' character and behavioral specifics. And the main highlights here are that the perceptions of agents' character are indeed structured. And they are structured according to 5 categories: approachability of an agent, sentiment towards a user, their professionalism, intelligence, and individuality. And furthermore, they are indeed different for different agents. So each of these 5 major themes actually represents a comparative scale for an agent's character. And the first scale, the theme of approachability, reflects how emotionally distant or approachable an agent is. The distance end in the scale includes, for example, an agent being snarky or closed off, and it often would be in contrast to a user's willingness to engage in closer and warmer relationships. For example, very one-sided relationship, like they didn't want to talk to me, like here's your answer and go away. The approachable side of the scale reflects perceptions of an agent as emotionally warm, friendly, and willing to interact with a user. For example, being welcoming, feeling more like a friend, being outgoing, and chill. The second theme, an agent's perceived sentiment toward the user, is defined by a dichotomy from genuine to disingenuous agent's attitude. So how trustworthy and how focused they are on a user. And the genuine aspect here includes descriptions of an agent being benevolent, caring, altruistic, for example, coming from a good place, being patient, accommodating, thoughtful, or really trying to help you. Opposing these caring, benevolent perceptions, the disingenuous side here reflects assessment of an agent as cunning or indifferent or inconsiderate, for example, descriptions such as sly or disingenuous or pretending, or about Siri using her sass as defense mechanism. Professionalism mostly refers to the agent's communication style as in work setting. For example, textbook assistant, no strings attached relationship. And there is no defined negative value here, but we did find that comparisons between agents often reflect the differences in the degree of professionalism. The intelligence of an agent was mainly discussed as a positive value. For example, descriptions like witty with knowledge, or well-read, or intelligent and sophisticated. But rarely there would be descriptions of agents' negative intelligence. For example, a little on a dumber side. The last thing, agent's individuality, refers to participants' perceptions of how much character an agent is displaying, and the specifics of this character. So this theme is represented by dichotomy from neutral versus defined individuality. And the neutral aspect here includes descriptions that explicitly highlight the ordinaries of an agent character. For example, shy, not many interests, or it's just some random kid trying to blend in. The specifics of defined individuality would differ for each agent. For example, Alexa would have glowing personality, and Google would be warmer but nerdy chill. So the behavioral perceptions are both structured along these 5 dimensions and are different for different agents. But what about the visualized perceptions? So we analyzed both how people were verbally describing the appearances of the agents and the outcomes of the visualization exercise. The visualization exercise outcomes were first composed into collages, and we also composed the cumulative visualizations for each agent by overlaying avatars. And as you can see, the outcomes are quite illustrative on the differences between the agents. And in the descriptions and in the avatars, we have identified 5 main parameters that would differ. And let me give you some examples here. The build was mainly referring to the height. For example, Alexa is slightly taller because she's dancing. However, there was no consistent trend here. With age, though, there was a trend. Alexa is generally perceived to be older, while Siri is perceived to be younger. For example, Siri sounds younger, like late 20s, Alexa, I think, late 40s, Google sounds older, so between the two, mid-30s. The specifics of facial expression often reflect the perceived approachability of an agent. For example, slight smile, because she's more playful. This is also reflected in the described differences in agents' facial expressions. For example, Google just seems stressed, they've got a lot of stuff, seems a little like their mind is somewhere else if you're having a conversation with them. Alexa is just maybe a little bit smiling, and Siri would be smiling a lot and has a lot of energy. The clothing style was heavily dependent on how defined was the personality of an agent for a particular participant. For Siri, such clothing descriptions revolved around daring personality with highlighted femininity. She would be wearing heels, miniskirts, crop tops, or, for example, I almost picture Siri in like a schoolgirl outfit, a pleated skirt, like any teenage rom-com. Google's clothes in this category are associated mainly with a stereotypically awkward persona. They could be wearing jeans and t-shirts, but it doesn't really fit them well. And Google would dress like glasses and the weird skirts and leotards. Alexa's clothes in this category often reflects her caring and cozy nature. For example, she would be wearing mom jeans and running shoes because that's a very mom thing, and glasses. So with that, we have identified the main themes along which both behavioral and visual perceptions of conversational agents are structured. But now we wanted to see what design elements affect each of those perceptions. And we identified 4 categories of the designed features mentioned by our participants when they were explaining their perceptions. And the first category here was the category of provided information, which includes the amount of information and the level of details. For example, they give more information, so it seems like they care about you understanding what they're saying. It also includes the very fact of providing the information. For example, Siri is just cold, she copped out on a lot of answers, and that made her more distant. Second is the designed interaction style of an agent. such as responsiveness to prompts, prompting users back, for example, seems closed off because doesn't do any prompts back like how are you and stuff, and the tendency to use jokes. For example, when I asked what's her favorite color, she told me a joke, so yes, way more playful. The third category is agent's voice characteristics. For example, more enthusiastic, like there is more inflection in her voice, sounds a bit more fun. And finally, we included here the category of associations motivated by the perceptions of the company. For example, Alexa is more chill, maybe because a brand reminds me of books and stuff. And in the paper, we demonstrate how all these parameters have different impact on the different behavioral dimensions and visualized perceptions of the agent. So to conclude, in this study, we found that both anthropomorphized behavioral perceptions and visual conceptions of conversational agents first have some structure to them, second, have consistent differences between them, and third, are interconnected. And with that, I would like to thank you for listening and invite you to read the full paper for more details on this study. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me using the email on this slide.
Okay, thank you, Anastasia. As I said before the talk, unfortunately, our speaker is not available to answer Q&A, to answer questions now. If you have questions, please check the paper and you can reach her by mail. We now move to the second and last paper of the station. It's called Keep Calm and Ride Along, Passenger Comfort and Anxiety as Physiological Responses to Autonomous Driving Styles. It's presented by Nicole, Dillen, and Marko Ilievski. If you have questions, do not hesitate to use the chat in YouTube or Twitch, and I will ask them in our discussion after the talk.
Hi everyone, and welcome to our talk on passenger comfort and anxiety as physiological responses to autonomous driving styles. My name is Nicole Dillen, and I will be presenting this work along with my co-author, Marko Ilievski. In a world where autonomous vehicles have been progressing rapidly to fully driverless autonomy, challenges still exist when it comes to their universal acceptance. For example, a 2019 AAA survey showed that 60 to 80% of drivers still expressed fear of riding in a fully autonomous vehicle. But even if this was not the case, even if there was already widespread acceptance, there still exists a second problem. People have individual driving preferences. While some prefer a more defensive approach to driving, others may tend towards a less defensive style. The autonomous vehicles today, however, only consider fixed preset driving styles that are primarily aimed at satisfying safety constraints. There is a large body of work studying the interactions between humans and autonomous vehicles. And most of this research tends to focus on the interaction of the safety driver. However, autonomous vehicles are quickly progressing towards full autonomy, where drivers are not really required. Given the public's fear and varying individual driving style preferences, how would passengers really perceive this new and fully automated driving behavior, knowing all the while that there is no human driver to fall back on? And even when the passenger has been the main research focus, most work has been conducted either within the safety net of a simulator or as a Wizard of Oz experiment. But these methods have a major drawback. They lack the external validity for realistic motion within an autonomous vehicle. The naturalistic field studies that do exist primarily use self-reported scores as measures of comfort and anxiety. It is important, however, to also study the physiological responses that involuntarily arise due to discomfort or anxiety about the driving style. To address these issues, we designed a passenger study that aimed at bridging the gap between lab and naturalistic studies, as well as between self-reported scores and their corresponding physiological measurements.
This study was designed using the autonomous vehicle at the University of Waterloo, known as the Autonomous. To study passenger responses to different driving styles, two aspects of the driving style of the Autonomous were varied and measured: the distance between it and the test vehicle, and the acceleration and jerk experienced by the vehicle and its passengers. The Autonomous was programmed to have two driving variations, an aggressive driving and defensive driving style. These variations to driving style were then related to the physiological responses captured from the participants, which included their eye movement entropy, heart rate, and galvanic skin response. To measure the participants' eye movement entropy, they were tasked with watching a video playing on a phone in front of them throughout the study. Eye tracking glasses were then used to calculate the number of times their gaze left the area of interest. A heart rate monitor was clipped to their earlobe, and electrodes were firmly attached to their fingers using Velcro straps to measure their heart rate and skin response respectively. This study was conducted on a closed court circuit in Waterloo, Canada. An additional Lexus served as a human-controlled test vehicle. This experiment had 4 trials, each consisting of 4 events. Each event attempted to isolate a particular driving style variable independently. We had a passing event which measured the participants' response to variations in lateral distance from the vehicle. The smaller the distance, the more aggressive the driving style. The stopping at an intersection event measured the longitudinal acceleration and jerk. This event studied both the deceleration during braking as well as the acceleration away from the intersection. There was a second stop event behind a stationary test vehicle, primarily aimed at isolating the longitudinal distance from that vehicle. The smaller the longitudinal distance, the more aggressive the driving style. This event inevitably confounded the distance with the acceleration and jerk during the stop. Finally, we had a turning event in which a participant responded to the lateral acceleration and jerk during a sharp turn. 2 sets of self-reported scores of comfort and anxiety were collected. The first consisted of verbal on-the-fly questions that we asked after each event. These questions captured the rating of comfort and anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10. And the second was a competitive state anxiety inventory 2 questionnaire that we asked at the end of each trial. We used the somatic subscale of this questionnaire, which ranged from 9 to 36 points. We recruited 20 participants, 10 males, 10 females, aged between 19 and 64 years of age. A pre-questionnaire showed that 70% of them preferred defensive driving styles, and most had much higher average trust in autonomous vehicles. This trust level could possibly be attributed to the fact that participants were primarily students from a technical university.
We ran an initial analysis to understand the role that each event played in the passenger's physiological response. We carried out this analysis independent of the underlying driving style and found that stopping events significantly raised passenger response levels more so than sharp turns and closely passing by a parked vehicle. This result demonstrates how critical a given event is on passenger comfort irrespective of the driving style. We then analyzed the driving style parameters themselves. This included individual variation to longitudinal and lateral components of acceleration, jerk, and distance to the agent vehicle. The goal of this analysis was to understand which of these driving style parameters most significantly affect a passenger's physiological response, and hence their comfort or anxiety. We immediately found that the presence of a lead vehicle on its own tends to raise response levels. Expectedly, the magnitude of longitudinal acceleration and jerk also increased the response level in either direction. But more interesting to note was the magnified nature of this effect in the presence of a lead vehicle. In fact, not only the presence, but also the proximity of the lead vehicle itself moderates the effect of acceleration and jerk. In other words, the closer participants were to the car ahead, the more uncomfortable they were about the stop. We ran a final analysis on the self-report scores, in which we related them to each of the physiological responses we measured. The goal here was to validate the ability of these physiological signals to reflect the self-reported comfort and anxiety scores. As expected, we found that galvanic skin response was a significant predictor of comfort and anxiety. Heart rate was also found to be similarly correlated, though the effect was not significant. These results served as a confirmation that we were indeed measuring comfort and anxiety, and they offer further insight into the physiological measurements that can be used in future in-vehicle studies.
We will now combine both our qualitative and quantitative results and put it all together. Stopping events were the most uncomfortable events we studied. This effect was further magnified by the presence of a lead vehicle. Not only was this presence a strong indicator, but the proximity also played a large role. This, unsurprisingly, was also confirmed during participant interviews, where the majority, 13 out of 20, 14 out of 20, reported stopping at an intersection as among the most uncomfortable events. Jerkiness of the driving style also played a large role in participants' discomfort, with some participants stating it was akin to teaching their children how to drive, and yet others felt that discomfort came both from hard braking and the revving of the engine during acceleration. Even with an aggressive driving style, turning was not found to cause much discomfort. This was confirmed both by the qualitative interviews, in which only 8 out of the 20 participants expressed any discomfort in a turning event, and in the quantitative data analysis, where lateral acceleration was not a significant predictor of physiological signals and thus comfort. The passing of a vehicle was another event that caused little to no discomfort, as only 4 of the participants claimed to feel any discomfort during this event. Finally, and most importantly, individual preferences depicted as the ID random effect were found to be significant across all responses. This solidified evidence that passengers do indeed have individual comfort levels, which, if violated, can cause anxiety. This leads us to the major takeaways from the study. The type of event really mattered. Stopping events behind stationary object had the greatest response to comfort and anxiety. This should be studied in greater detail in future studies. The presence of a lead vehicle, along with its proximity, modulated the effect of deceleration behind that vehicle. Galvanic skin response was found to be the most significant in predicting comfort, making it a potential candidate for other autonomous vehicle studies. Lastly, and most importantly, individual responses vary significantly. This means that 2 different passengers can have different responses to the same driving style.
So how do these results really help us? For one, by understanding which driving style parameters affect passenger comfort, we can introduce passenger-specific driving styles that accommodate individual preferences. We can then avoid relying purely on fixed presets that could otherwise be too aggressive or maybe even too defensive. We can even take this a step further and adapt the driving style in an on-the-fly manner. To this end, we could use unobtrusive physiological measurements, such as heart rate and skin response, as implicit sources of passenger feedback to inform changes to the driving style. Multimodal feedback can then be used to communicate these on-the-fly changes back to the passenger and help keep them in the loop. Thus, by catering to individual driving preferences and responding to changes in comfort, we can build systems that actively accommodate the passenger's individual needs instead of relying on a one-size-fits-all approach. As a result, we can help reduce the fears associated with riding in a fully autonomous vehicle, and consequently help pave the way to a more widespread embrace of this rapidly evolving technology. Potential directions for future work include exploring additional events such as cut-in and more complex intersection events, as well as events involving pedestrians. We can also investigate additional driving style parameters such as velocity and time to collision. We can adjust our models to control for weather and understand its impact on passenger comfort, as well as account for unexpected events such as emergency takeovers or obstacles. Additionally, we can begin investigating methods that adaptively adjust the driving style in an on-the-fly manner, while considering additional difficulties such as accommodating the needs of multiple passengers in a single vehicle. As we reach the end of our talk, we would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone involved in supporting us through this project. Specifically, we would like to thank our co-authors, as well as the University of Waterloo for all the help and resources they provided.
Okay, thank you, Nicole and Marko. We are now live with Oliver Schneider, another author of the paper. Hi, Oliver.
Hi, Quentin.
Cool talk. So I'm going to start with a question that was asked on Twitch. When recruiting, did any people say they wouldn't participate due to perceived potential danger in riding in a completely autonomous vehicle? So the person is wondering if there is potential small selection bias in participants. Are they already more likely to trust autonomous driving than possibly the more general population?
Right. So, to my knowledge, I don't think anyone explicitly said they would not participate in the study. I'd have to confirm with the lead authors to make sure that's true. If it's the case, it would be only 1 or 2 people, I think. But we did recruit from a population of people in a university town which is a very tech-focused town as well. I mean, it's Waterloo. So there probably is some bias in the population of people that we collected. So I don't think it's maybe as extreme as you're worried about, but that definitely is a limitation of the study.
Thank you. So before I ask my own question, I would like to remind the audience that if they have any question, they can ask them by writing in the chats of Twitch or YouTube or whatever streaming platform they are using, and I will add them. So I have one question of my whole, and I was wondering if the emotional responses that you measured during the study would differ to the one that someone would have just by being in a car with a driver that they don't know, even if it's a human driver.
Right. So that's a very good question. I think that, we don't know the answer. I'd have to speculate. My guess is that it would be similar results, but maybe muted, depending on A, whether it's a human driver or not, and B, whether they knew the driver or not. There's another study from last year from Müll et al. That looked at how people trusted the autonomous vehicle versus the human driver, even though it was a simulated human driver, so it was always an autonomous vehicle actually driving. And they found that people trusted a human driver much more than the autonomous vehicle. So I think that there's, at least with the state of the technology right now, people tend to trust human drivers over autonomous vehicles. So I don't know if it's because it's the level of the technology right now, or if it's because there's something else going on with a human driver. Maybe it's this fact that you could have a closed loop system, like a driver might be aware of your preferences, maybe or maybe not. And so they might be able to adapt based off of your reactions. But I think the study that I'm talking about really only looked at driving styles as a whole. And what we found in this study, because we did it on a closed track, is we found that these events were what really found was a much stronger effect than the overall driving style. And so I think that we'd have to look more closely into those events and at a finer grain level of different interactions when driving to be able to see if that effect would happen with if we could replicate that effect with our study or a similar study.
Interesting. Are you aware, just on top of my mind, are you aware of any long-term study with autonomous driving? Like, does this again, the emotional responses that you measured, do you see like something that is, maybe going down as time goes and people get more used to the vehicle?
I would imagine that is the case. I'm not aware of any long-term study, but I'm sure that people in the industry have collected some data, just not probably the level of physiological data that we were able to collect on this study here. So I think that as the technology becomes more prominent, people become more trusting of it, it becomes more normalized. But there could also be this differing factor that maybe there's something we have to design in the system, like some sort of reactivity or some smoothing out of how it interacts to also gain that trust.
Interesting. Which your study already gave some insights and what we could look at.
Yeah.
Something like you started to talk about something in your previous answer, which I found very interesting, and I was wondering if it was really maybe a question of different preferences or maybe different perception of what is safe driving, right? And if just by possibly being more transparent, so giving more feedbacks to their passenger about the driving choices that are made, could this be also tremendously help and trust and the emotional responses?
Right. I suspect so. I think one goal of this project, one area that we'd really like to go next, is on providing that transparent feedback or that closed loop, some sort of implicit interaction, so that the car can react to the passenger. We're hoping to try and get to that study with this work, but it turns out that running an autonomous vehicle study is fairly involved in its own right. So I think wholeheartedly, we should look into this ability to provide information about the driving decisions, ideally in a low bandwidth way, because if people are using that time to do other tasks, you want to make sure you're not intruding upon that time. And we have some ideas of where to go from there. So hopefully we'll be able to come up with those.
Interesting. I'm really looking forward for this. A question from Marko. How were the autonomous vehicle capabilities introduced to the participants? The person says, I recall there being work that suggests that the introduction has significant effect on trust.
Right. So unfortunately, I'd have to direct you to the lead authors to get the details on that. I believe we gave most of the capabilities of the vehicle. And of course, they only participate if they had, gave informed consent. So, in this case, I can't speak to the nuances. So I'd direct you towards the lead authors for that.
Thank you, Oliver. I have no more questions. If there is someone from the audience who has a last question they want to ask, I think we still have a bit of time. We actually have plenty of time. If not, maybe we can wait for 1 or 2 minutes because there's some delay with the streaming platforms. Otherwise, I think we can end this first session with this.
I'll stay on the line for a couple minutes, but let the chair decide how we proceed.
Well, let's just wait to 20 to 10 maybe. Someone is asking, Waterloo HCI, Robert, did anything surprise you during the study?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think there's maybe 2 standout surprises. I think one from the study itself is that people tend to get quite bored at the end of the study. So even if people were fairly distrustful, it seems like people were, regardless of the trust entering the study, I think by the end of the later session, because they went around the track 4 times, they were starting to feel quite bored. And so having a different task or having shorter sessions might be something that might be more important in the future. And we're just like, oh, how do you deal with this? So that was probably one of the surprises that emerged from the study itself. From the analysis, I think this idea that the events were really the important part was the interesting and surprising finding. we had designed the study around these different driving styles. So the idea that it would be aggressive or defensive, and it would respond in different ways. But we found that effect was reduced overall, and we really had to get into this fine-grained event level analysis. And I think that's something that's missing from prior literature, and something that we were able to look at here because we were working at this close track and we were able to control the environment. Is these specific events are really what matter or have the strongest effect. And so that's where I think we really want to direct our efforts to follow up on this work.
It's a good thing, though, that they're getting bored in a way.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I don't think people were distrustful of the car. So this does give it some validity down the line when these technologies are maybe a bit more normalized, potentially.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question by
Yes.
Mark again. Will you investigate whether these responses are consistent over time, or whether they might become less significant with a combination, or with a more demanding, non-driving related task?
Right. So that's a very good question. We had people watch a video in this and look at their phone. Different tasks might influence how much they notice what's going on around them. And in the study, they're directed to kind of act naturalistically. So they look at the screen, and then maybe they look up if something happened, but they go back to their screen. So they didn't have to stay glued to their task. So it wasn't a completely absorbing task. And I imagine that would change the effect. I wonder if it would change the effect of a lead vehicle, because the other finding we found is that the presence of an active object, for example, stopped behind a car, it magnified the effect of stopping. But if people are more involved in their tasks, they might not notice that car as much. And so I wonder if it might mute some of that effect if they have reduced awareness of what's going on outside of the car. But again, this is speculation. I think that's a good area to look at for future work. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Oliver. I think we can end with this.
Thank you.
So we'll have a short break until the next session, which I think start at 10.